can start. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for those that have made it here. After the closing after the closing ceremony, you are here, so I guess you are very interested, and we are going to have a very nice conversation. I am Anabel Cruz, originally from Uruguay, the director of an organization based in Uruguay, ICD. I also work regionally and globally. And when we thought about this workshop, looking at the program and the work we are doing in Latin America and also globally, we wanted to combine or to work in the intersection of two themes of this conference: protecting defenders and the anti-corruption movement. And we saw the opportunity of discussing from different angles, from different aspects. At the beginning, we saw it like these two, but I'm sure, and I was discussing with our moderator, we can have more angles to discuss the issues that we wanted to bring to this table. As in terms of protecting defenders, it has been said a lot in this conference. I am really surprised how important, and I'm really also amazed at how much attention defenders, human rights defenders, journalists in risk, and others, human rights defenders working for their causes, are the attention that they are receiving. Can we do something from civil society? Is it only the state responsibility to protect defenders? So those are some of the questions, and there will be many more that I think we can cover in this fishbowl. So our moderator will be my dear friend Andres Falconer. He works now with the Global Partnership for Social Accountability at the World Bank. And Andres, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation.
Thank you. It's awkward to using the mic, but we are recording, and this is going for posterity, where I'm sure we will have a much larger audience. But this is really a special group. They know that if you, as I usually say, if you made it here having choice, and in this ungodly hour in the afternoon, after the event is more or less officially done, and there's a party waiting for us, you must really be interested. So let's make this relevant for us and for those that will be watching. So in case you're still wondering, if you're in the right room, this is Shining a Light, Global Accountability and Anti-Corruption. The movement's struggle to protect defenders. And thank you to Anabel for the kind intro and the invitation to moderate this panel. And I have to say, if your path hasn't crossed with Anabel over the years, you're missing out. So Anabel is the director, founder and director of ICD and Rendir Cuentas in Uruguay, but she was the former board chair of Civicus, the world's foremost civil society alliance, and the outgoing co-chair representing civil society of the Open Government Partnership. So a trendsetter in many ways, and the key architect of this session. And as she said, we're touching on two of the main themes or tracks of this conference, which is the defending the defenders, the protecting defenders, and also democracy and human rights under siege. But if you see these as threads, there are probably other tracks and other threads that we could weave into the conversation. And our goal is going to be to make sense of this. A third important thread, and I know that's something that our speakers care about, is on the accountability and integrity standards of civil society itself, and in the context of those tracks about defending defenders and upholding democracy and human rights. So there are common threads in this conference: the threats to anti-corruption champions, the breakdown of societal trust, trends such as the rise of misinformation, disinformation, and as defenders of the environment, human rights, whistleblowers, and anti-corruption champions are under threat. This is an absolutely necessary debate. Physical threats, of course, are the unthinkable extreme that unfortunately happens all too often in all too many places. But we have to think of that extreme as part of a continuum of chipping away at civil society, chipping away at civic space, and is a continuum that can creep up incrementally and unnoticed, which, again, whether through judicial harassment, fake news campaigns, all the way to foreign agent laws and other issues that I'm sure you are familiar with. Therefore, it is really essential for civil society to uphold the highest integrity standards, rather than simply assume that its righteousness will be accepted as self-evident and uncontested in the societies in which we operate. So those are the threads that we're going to be making sense of, and we have the diverse set of experiences. We had one more panelist listed that unfortunately couldn't join us, but in addition to Annabelle, we are joined by Mauricio Alarcón, who is the head of the Fundacion Ciudadania y Desarrollo of Ecuador, and Gaia Chevale, who leads the Lithuanian National NGO Coalition. And I think it's a real privilege for us to be able to hear a little bit more about civil society in our host country. So lastly, and hopefully not least, as your moderator, as Annabelle said, I work with a facility of the World Bank that is a civil society facing and supporting a grant-making facility, the GPSA, the Global Partnership for Social Accountability, in a moment where we are currently designing a successor facility for the GPSA. So these themes are extremely relevant for upscaling the work that the World Bank itself can play in supporting civil society. And so as your moderator, it is my prerogative also to inject myself in the conversation, mix and match things, invite you to sit into in the fishbowl if you'd like to, and have a lively conversation, taking advantage that we are a small cozy group. So and I do want to start by asking the audience again, since you had a choice of getting ready, freshening up for the party, going for a nap, and being here or at one of the remaining sessions. Can you just say a couple of, if anyone would volunteer, just telling us why you're here? What made you choose this session, and perhaps a word of expectation or a question that will help frame the initial comments from our panelists. Would anyone like to volunteer? And we have a mic that will go around because we are recording. Please.
Yeah, thanks for that. Nicholas Miller from ICNL. I'm here because ICNL, the organization with which I work, seeks to protect civic space. And part of that is obviously protecting defenders. We recently co-chaired with several states in the Summit for Democracy process a civic space working group. And one of the things that I heard supporting that working group was what I will call a degree of constraint or even lack of real commitment or vision from states that should, or we think about as being supportive of defenders and protection, on how we do that. So I think we as a civil society and as a group of activists need to come up with better ways to convince those states of the importance and guide them on how they can do it. And I'm hoping this illustrious panel will answer those questions.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes? Andrés, right? Tocayo.
Sit. Okay. Oh, thank you. My name is Andres Hernandez. I'm the Executive Director of Transparency International Colombia. And I'm here because I'm looking for ways in which we can all together trying to bring down to concrete actions what we talk a lot about protecting defenders. But it's really complicated, and it really needs concrete tools, concrete actions, coordinated actions. And, well, perhaps the expectation is way too high, but I think we need to continue discussing up to a level in which, again, concrete actions can be taken. We know it's difficult for states, but it should be also a field in which civil society can innovate and try to promote ideas that move the frontier in this very sensitive issue.
Thank you. So we have two calls for actions, two calls for thinking through strategies, thinking through how we move forward. And it's very easy to get bogged down by this, by the negativity of the current moment. But we do need to move forward, and we do need innovative strategies. Any other comment before I hand over to our distinguished speakers? So on that note, I invite Mauricio. And Mauricio, you have the floor. You have a few minutes. If you could care to really contextualize a bit for us, what is the situation of the champions of rights, anti-corruption, and what threats are they facing?
Thank you, Andres, and thank you, Annabelle, for organizing the panel. Thank you all for coming. And it's not just about Ecuador, it's about Latin America. Just a few hours ago, we had a meeting between the TI chapters, and we were saying that with very small differences, civil society in our countries are facing the same challenges. Democracy is suffering the same backslidings. And there's maybe just one country that is still surviving the liberal democracy, that is Uruguay. In Latin America, we usually used to speak about Costa Rica, Uruguay, Chile. But after 2019, I think Chile and Costa Rica not anymore. This week, the president of Costa Rica, I don't know if you have read in the newspapers, has said that Costa Rica has lived during the last 40 years the perfect dictatorship. And all the former presidents signed a letter against him saying, hey, this is a democracy and we are trying to resist. So please don't talk about dictatorships. But of course, this is just an example of what's going on. As I said before, this is not just about Ecuador, but Latin America. And I think the best way to start is talking about the bad things or the sad news. And I think that the situation for human rights defenders and anti-corruption activists in Ecuador and Latin America is increasingly precarious. Of course, there are, as I mentioned, particularities in each country, but in general, the situation is almost the same. We often face significant risks, threats, harassment, violence, for our efforts to promote transparency, accountability, and human rights. We said, as I mentioned a couple of hours ago, that of course we are speaking about TI chapters, organizations specialized in working in transparency, integrity, and anti-corruption, but we are human rights defenders and we work on human rights. In Ecuador, recent years have seen a troubling rise in attacks against activists, particularly those defending environmental rights and indigenous territories, I must say, from mining and oil extraction activities. And across Latin America, similar patterns are observed with countries like Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, reporting high number of attacks and murders of human rights defenders. There are many factors that contribute to this dangerous environment, and those factors include pervasive corruption, weak judicial systems, and the influence of powerful economic interests. Organized crime, drug dealing, and even state actors that are the ones who are supposed to be responsible for protecting us, collude, creating a hostile environment, a hostile atmosphere for those challenging the status quo. In many instances, impunity prevails, unfortunately, with perpetrators of violence against activists rarely being brought to justice. This not only undermines the rule of law, but also emboldens further attacks. And we were discussing about the bullet points of what we must be discussing here, and I think that we all know that the responsibility, as I mentioned before, for protecting us falls on the state and its institutions. But when the state fails, there is also a responsibility on international organizations, international human rights protection systems, and civil society. Primarily, of course, it's the duty of national governments to ensure a safety environment for us. This includes not creating laws, but implementing and enforcing them. On the opening plenary 3 days ago, we heard about it, and it's the same thing we have been discussing 20 years from now. It's about implementing and enforcing laws to protect human rights defenders, to provide adequate security measures, to ensure that crimes against human rights defenders and activists are investigated and prosecuted effectively. But when the state fails, when the institutions fail, international organizations such as United Nations and the Special Rapporteurships and our Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, in our case, speaking about Latin America, play a crucial role, of course, in monitoring and reporting abuses, but also offering platforms for advocacy, to apply diplomatic pressure on governments to fulfill their obligations. And when there's no justice in our countries, we try to reach these international systems because they can provide us some protective measures, the provisionary measures, or they can give us emergency funds, or they can help us having temporarily relocations, which can, I think, deter potentially aggressors. And from our side, and I'm going to finish with this, civil society organizations, both local, global networks like the ones we belong to, also contribute significantly by offering support networks with legal aid. Anabel is part of Rendir Cuentas, and they are always taking care of any single member and what's going on in the country. ICNL is also very important in Latin America, as they are always looking on new laws and new regulations against civil society. So supporting, giving legal aid, training on security protocols in countries like mine, where there's a huge presence of organized crime, it's amazing. And I think these civil society organizations, local and global, raise awareness about what's going on with our situation. You can also help us mobilizing public opinion and engaging in advocacy actions to push for stronger protections and, of course, accountability. And Andrés, I'm going to finish with this as the time runs by.
Thank you so much, Mauricio. Yes, and you were you've pointed to common patterns that we witness throughout Latin America, and that resonate with patterns that we see around the world. And you point to the responsibility of the state, but also the need for a reaction when that fails. So I'm pleased to hand over the microphone to Gaia, who, as I introduced her, leads the Lithuanian NGO coalition. So I think it's a privilege to learn a little bit about civil society here. But my question to start, and as a provocation really, is, are these third world problems that we're talking about, do they resonate at all with the reality in Lithuania, as you've come so far so quickly over the years? And if they do, how do you engage in this dialogue? But also tell us a little bit about your role in advocating and promoting higher integrity standards for civil society as a way to actually protect the space that you have fought for and conquered for civil society in Lithuania and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. I think he's hiding because he says he's not local, but he lives here actually, so he knows the situation more or less. louder. I cannot speak little, but I can take the microphone closer, okay? Sorry, my voice is lost it last week. So we have actually two people who can share, not only me, and he can agree and disagree, and he knows more or less the situation. But though the question you ask, it's so a huge question. I could speak for an hour, but I guess I have only a few minutes. And what I want to share, it's actually we have a little bit different situation what we heard before from Latin America. And what we face that human defenders could be in the better position, but in Lithuania, but they are much in better position than in Latin America. And what we see that they actually play a crucial role in combating corruption or defending human rights or democratic values. But when we spoke about this question before our discussion, I thought about the three challenges, actually, which is not only for Lithuania, but are global. So first of all, it's the change in corruption. And even the Munich Security Conference, which was held in February, the corruption was one of the key issues. And we thought, and they were naming the weaponized corruption. And I think it is the key challenge. The second one, it is what we see with the third year in the war against Ukraine. We see that some authoritarian regimes are involving. And what you mentioned before, it is the laws against international agents, and they aim to limit critical voices and funding of civil society organizations and human defenders organizations, mainly the human rights fighters. And I think this is a huge as well challenge for the whole global society. And it starts from several countries, but it is evolving to the other ones. And that's really, I think it's a critical issue. And the third thing, what we really face a lot in Lithuania, so it is the hybrid attacks. And the hybrid attacks are changing as well. So it was more about cyberspace, but now it's about the climate, the energy, the food, and migration issues. And it's really challenging, and it's very important us to work together. And coming back to your question, what you said, because I thought, what could be the takeaway from this session? What can we do? And what I see that first we talk about the security and defense issues as one, and corruption as other. And now these communities should work together. And sometimes what we see, we're working in the bubble. We work with the civil society, but we contact some private sector or even some government, and they say, we don't know what you do. We heard you are good, but we don't know really what you do. So I think these bubbles should be broken, and we should work more together. Speaking about Lithuania and CSO and situation, I said before that it is quite good, but we have elections coming up, and it shouldn't be the burden for us, but it is, because we don't know how it's going to be after autumn elections. It's the governmental elections, and every time after elections, it takes at least half of the year to show what CSOs are doing in human rights, in environmental field working, and social, educational fields working in different ones. But that really as well, it is a headache for us, because it does not ensure the continuous of the work. And in this field, when we have this huge threats coming, which I mentioned, I think it's very important to ensure the follow-up of the work.
Thank you very much. So indeed, we're not talking only about third world problems. This agenda resonates, perhaps it is less raw and brutal as the reality that we see in other parts of the world, and in my Latin America for sure. But there are real challenges, and you did an excellent job at laying out the weaponization, the limiting of critical voices, and the hybrid attacks as a deliberate strategy to weaken the role and the voice of civil society. So, Annabelle, you brought us here, and you are the you are the artisan that has been weaving these threads for quite some time in a number of organizations that you've been involved with, including this the point about upholding higher integrity standards and higher accountability standards for civil society. I know that is one of your passions, and that's a topic that isn't always linked to the Defending Defenders agenda as well. Can you walk us through your initial thoughts, and we will have a round of mixing this a little bit more up. By the way, the reason we have chairs here in the front is that we are making it deliberately cozy, and you're welcome to join the panel. So please do if you'd like to. But Annabelle, can you take us from here, because we have a call for action and we need to sort this out.
Maybe I want to touch both things. How do I see the relationship, or how I think we should see the relationship between civil society and defending defenders, protecting defenders? It's true that it's the state obligation, but civil society organizations have also a responsibility to protect defenders, to facilitate their work, and in many cases it's our own work, human rights work. So organizations have to be strong, have to be accountable, have to have resources in order to have the legitimacy, the credibility, and the capacity to do this work, to protect defenders in different situations and conditions. That's one point. I was listening to Mary Lawlord on the plenary, second plenary, I think it was. She is the special rapporteur for the situation of human rights defenders. And in the plenary, I was very surprised about two things. She said, we have to change the narrative, going from the victimization to concrete examples of how important the work of defenders is. And we have to, she said, we have to recognize that anti-corruption activists, anti-corruption fighters are also human rights defenders, and that brings a lot of responsibility for the international community vis-a-vis these defenders. And in parallel with state, or because of the state fails, there are many initiatives from civil society at global level or also at regional level. I can mention the European Union mechanism to protect defenders. It's called ProtectDefenders. It's a consortium of 12 NGOs that give different kind of support to human rights defenders: training, safety spaces, temporary relocations. The organization Justice and Peace has initiated a network of shelter cities, and I have here 3 cities, 23 globally cities around the world. With during the last 10 years, they have supported around 1,000 human rights defenders. Sometimes it's temporary relocation, sometimes there is another kind of support, legal support, support to the children of human rights defenders. In the case of Latin America, we have one shelter city in Costa Rica, and we have done a feasibility study in order to see the conditions for launching a regional relocation program in Montevideo, Uruguay. Maybe because of all that, you say that we have good press in Uruguay. It's not that we are so good. we have good communication managers, I think. So it's a possibility that we are exploring with different donors and organizations to see if it's possible, feasible, and necessary. Apparently, and we have here people from other countries in Latin America, they can speak to if it's necessary or not. The situation in Latin America is worsening and has worsened for human rights defenders. Then can a civil society organization do this, launch a program of this kind? One of the difficulties or challenges that we have faced is to convince the government, the state of Uruguay, of what would be the role in this kind of action. So I think that if we can get more ideas and more ways and possibilities for implementing actions in these important calls, I think that that's going to be an important takeaway from this session. Thank you, Andre.
Thank you. Thank you, Annabelle. And I think you brought some wisdom from being a good attendee at the conference and being active in this field. But starting with the point about changing the narrative. And on that point of changing the narrative and framing the debate, I also want to bring into the room the idea, reflecting a little bit on who are the defenders. And this comes from a conversation I've recently had with an organization that supports defenders. We all know, and some of us here in the room are defenders, are the activists, are the human rights advocates. But there's also a very large and an increasingly large number of, we'd call them, the unwitting defenders, the people that found themselves in the position of needing protection when they were simply doing the good work that they do in whatever area, environmental work, and then just happened to rub against some vested interest and find themselves under threat unexpectedly, and they may be doing just good technical work. Or the whistleblower. I don't know that many people choose and set out to be whistleblowers as a career option, but it is something that happens upon you when you're faced with a certain situation that confronts your own integrity standards. And it's fascinating to bring these people into the room because very often they are not who we traditionally think as the advocates, the activists in this front, and they probably are more bewildered, overwhelmed than those of us that are prepared. That we know we're fighting a fight and we know what the fight is, we know what the interests are. So that's somebody I wanted to bring into the room. But I want to bring all of you into the room before we go for another round of debates. We're a cozy group, so I would welcome comments, not just questions to the panelists, because I know that there's a lot of wisdom in the room. If you can keep your comment short and to the point, but yes, any questions that you would like to ask for our panelists, but also your own views, your own perspectives, especially as we have a call to action here. We have a call to action to change the narrative, to move this agenda forward. And if you could please start by identifying yourself. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Karina. I'm from Canada, and I'm one of the participants in the Transparency School of Integrity that's happening in parallel to this conference. So my country, Canada, actually, as of 3 years ago, has an immigration program for human rights defenders. And the idea is if someone is a human rights defender in another country and because of their work is facing persecution that forces them to flee, they may be eligible to come to Canada and be resettled as a refugee. There's a cap. I think it's 250 people per year, including their families. It's a relatively new program. And so I was thinking a bit about what Mr. Alarcón said about how traditionally, the responsibility to protect human rights defenders falls with the home state, otherwise international civil society. This is an example of a foreign government. It's not maybe an actor that traditionally does this kind of work. And also you mentioned how human rights defenders need temporary protective measures. This would be a more permanent protective measure because under international refugee laws and under Canada's immigration rules, if a refugee returns to their home country, they actually lose their permanent resident status in Canada. So I was just curious, this initiative that Canada has, is that something that you've seen more broadly in other countries taking on these kind of initiatives? And do you see opportunities for this approach or maybe more limitations than benefits? Just curious on your thoughts, because it is a fairly new program in Canada, and I haven't heard many examples of other countries doing the same.
And if we do have any comments or questions in the room, I think in the back.
Thank you. I'm Andrea Rocca from Transparency International. I was glad that you mentioned the human rights defenders protection ecosystem and the organization that exists there. I think it's important that we are all aware. And I come from that sector, and I also see that they are completely overwhelmed. Though, excellent job, but it's a drop in the ocean. And they have to prioritize the case that they take up, which is a nice way to say that sometimes they can't help. They have to say no because of the volume of requests that they have and the limited capacity. So my comment that I can turn into a question as well there is, I think we also need to develop additional mechanisms, strengthen our capacity within the anti-corruption community. There is also very often a division in countries, and sometimes the existing schemes may not have the same outreach to the very local grassroots activists doing social audits about the funds that are used by the municipality. And so we need to use them, but we also believe need to create additional structure and strengthen our own capacity to protect anti-corruption activists within our community. And the question can simply be what the panel think. Is it just duplication, or is it a good way forward? Thank you.
So the challenge of scaling the infrastructure that exists, the systems that exist, and then do we mean simply growing, doing more, or changing the way we go about it, if I get you correctly?
Or creating also protection mechanisms within the anti-corruption.
No, you need the mic.
Sorry, scaling them and then we use them, or actually creating additional protection systems within the anti-corruption community.
Brilliant. Anyone else before we go for another round? Oh, yes.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kirill from the United States. A question for the panel. I don't necessarily disagree with sort of the conflation of human rights defenders and anti-corruption activists, but I wonder, how would you recommend we manage the risks that might that anti-corruption champions might face in environments where being a human rights defender is more dangerous than being an anti-corruption champion, and being labeled such would be maybe undesirable? Thanks.
Do we need to label them, right? Is that the question about risks? Thank you.
Yes, I also, I wanted to...
we're competing with the sound from
so
the
it's,
room, so you can speak up, please.
It's Carlotta Bezzozzi from Civil Society Europe. At European Union level, we are discussing with many organizations, including organizations that are working on the area of protecting human rights defenders, about the need to have also a protection mechanism in Europe. And we see the need not only for people who are facing problems in Europe because they are from Europe, from the EU, but also human rights defenders that come from outside and are also put under pressure by foreign governments, and we see that more and more. But in doing so, and that comes my question, we are seeing that, of course, a number of initiatives from civil society. There are also a number of different tools and mechanisms from different international organizations or countries. And these sometimes are very diverse and also not very much fragmented and not very much known also by people who are facing these problems on the ground. So I just wanted to ask if you see the same challenges, and we saw that actually mapping what there is, trying to find some sense of it is also a need.
Thank you very much. I think we can do a round. We got 4 questions, if I got them right. One is, again, a comment on a relatively new program in Canada. The need to scale and the feeling that the capacity is overwhelmed. The question on risks faced by anti-corruption defenders, and the discussion about the debate in the EU and a need for enhanced protection mechanisms. I will not ask any one of you to in particular order, because you may feel more comfortable in commenting on one or another of the topics. So if anybody wants to volunteer first. I think it's on. Yeah.
No, we have to turn it on. It was on.
It's fine. I think you can hear me. So I'll just start, and I think my colleagues will follow on. And I will start with the mapping. Thank you for bringing up. I thought it the same. First, we have to make the mapping and know what and who are doing, and then we can answer as well the other questions. And I think Canada is a good example, and is it relatively new? But we can take the examples and ask how it's working. How do they, the people and the Canadian government and CSOs, how they see the situation, how they see the program running. I think it's very important just to monitor as well. Is it good, or can we change? And then it will be one part of the mapping. And what you brought up as well, in EU already we have challenges with the human rights defenders, and we have several countries which really has a complicated situation, and human rights defenders are fleeing the countries because it's very hard for them to stay in. And what I said in the first, we had these laws, international agents laws, which try to shut down the voices of critical voices or different voices. And I think it's one of the values of democracy that we can hear the different opinions and voices, and no one has to be shut down or closed. So I think one of the actions we have to take away is the mapping, and it's the first homework for us, for all of us.
I'm just going to say that maybe 15 years ago, I can't remember the exact date, the discussion was about human rights defenders and journalists. Are journalists human rights defenders? And of course, we had to wait until the UN signed a declaration saying that journalists are human rights defenders to cover and protect them in the same way the universal system was doing. So, speaking now about anti-corruption activists, as I mentioned before, we are human rights defenders. So I think it's just putting us under that umbrella so we can have the same protection and we can reach the measures that are now, I think, legally enough to protect human rights defenders. The work we are doing as transparency activists is like defending human rights. We were discussing that earlier today. In that sense, I think we must start also working with international organizations and international systems to let them understand. I think Mary Lorlord has already understood this, that we are the same and we need the same protections. And you were discussing, Andres, about defenders in general. And when you were saying the things you said just a few minutes ago, I was thinking about what's going on in my country related to the active presence of organized crime, as I mentioned, where maybe a judge who is working in a good way, doing his job, protecting people, applying the law, is threatened by an organized crime group. Maybe he doesn't consider himself as a human rights defender or as an anti-corruption activist, but he is. And if he received this kind of threats, for example, he must be protected under a program like the one you mentioned, Corina, related to Canada, or even provisionary measures from the Inter-American System on Human Rights. It's not the traditional view of human rights defenders. We must break that. I understand that CSOs like the ones we run are important, of course, but the condition of being a defender is not directly related only to an NGO or an NGO that works on human rights or a traditional media, not digital media. So we must start thinking like in a wider way.
Well, I don't think I have an answer to the question. I have more questions. And one of my concerns is, what are the kind of protections that human rights defenders need and that we can give them or that we can absorb as human rights defenders ourselves? And that is temporary relocation a good option in some cases, because that has been one of the most difficult issues to explain to governments, to explain to states. This is not political refugees. And I see, I mean, the world has changed. I was myself many years ago a political refugee. I had to leave my country and could come back 13 years after that to Uruguay, when the military dictatorship, when we regained democracy. This is not the same. I mean, in some cases, human rights defenders can need another kind of protections to strengthen some capacity, to take care of their children, to leave the conflict area for some months. And I'm asking this also to other countries, how you see this. Is this viable? Is this worth? And is this useful for human rights defenders? Sorry, I come with more questions and not answers, Andresa.
Now you have to give us answers.
Thank you. No, that is not my role. My role is to mix it up. But I think you make a, I mean, beyond the conceptualization or whatever it will say on a resolution or a declaration, I think widening the concept of defenders is fascinating and I would say important in the context of this broader conversation, because, you know, we can realize that the group is much, much larger than we think, and in many ways, regardless of what you do for a living, we are all defenders to the extent that we are doing our work with integrity and fulfilling our role in society. We should not just be seen as defender on the moment that you're under threat, right? And you don't see necessarily that it's the physical threat that turns you into there is a continuum, there's a nuance, and you don't see, you know, when you look at the needs of threatened defenders, the ones that need protection, that relocation, you know, asylum is the only solution. There is a wide range of protections that are needed to firstly ensure that the judge continues doing their work, to ensure that a journalist does not feel threatened in his or her reporting, and that people that do face real threat or do face real pressure as part of their daily work, you know, do not have their personal integrity, and their livelihoods threatened to the point that they will need to move to Canada or, you know, request asylum or, you know, change their identity and their line of work. So that really does open the conversation to an interesting discussion. But again, we're not here simply to open and raise more questions. We did come with a call for action to move forward with an agenda, and I would again invite the audience to share thoughts, to push back on some of these ideas, perhaps to share examples of practices that you think are useful or are interesting in terms of scaling up, you know, meeting demand, or dealing with specific unsung heroes or issues, please come. As I said to the early comers of this meeting, if you're here at this ungodly hour on Friday, we know that you're interested in the topic. So please share with us a little bit of your experience.
I want to challenge a bit more the discussion based in our experience in Colombia, and this is kind of a self-critic at the same time. Starting with the positive side, the best protection mechanisms we have achieved so far when working with whistleblowers who are in danger are self-protection mechanisms or local community-related mechanisms. We don't want people to get away from their house, from their surroundings. We don't want their kids to go away from their schools. And that has worked up to a point in which things get complicated. And when we try to scale, we face quite a few challenges. But one of them that I want to highlight is the need to actually have more detailed information on which is the best protection mechanism that they require. And we don't have enough data to do that because often reporting corruption, it's something that is not it's not being seen well by communities because the state has no data either. And when we try to analyze furthermore the needs of protection of many of the whistleblowers that we support, we just don't get enough information to properly detail further protection mechanisms. So I wanted to challenge a bit the conversation because sometimes we think that, going away of the country and leaving the country, I mean, that's the extreme, for me, protection mechanism. We should do as much as we can at the local level, at their own conditions, but it's still difficult to do it at a larger scale. I mean, it's not that easy, and at the same time, the other thing that we always are confronted with is how do we dismantle the drivers of the threats that these people face. Because it's not about giving protection to everybody, because that's impossible at some point, but it's also fighting against the causes that provoke those threats, that provoke those difficult conditions in which they live. So the agenda gets a bit more complicated. This is not to say that we cannot do anything. This, again, going back to how do we continue supporting each other, exchanging experiences, and seeing the best ways to continue moving forward.
Oh, brilliant, and thanks for continuing on that line of nuancing the issue, not understanding the problem better, so that we're not looking at one-size-fits-all solutions. Thank you. Who's next?
Thanks. My question relates to the gentleman from Colombia.
Will you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, Josh from Open Society Foundation in the United States. I think related to that, one thing I often see in our work is the debate of how much publicity we try to work with defenders on before or after they're targeted. There's an argument to be made that if they are in the public eye, they're more protected, because if something happens to them, if they're prosecuted by a government, if they're attacked, then it will cause more outcry. There's also the flip side, which is that that'll make their work that much more difficult, particularly in corruption that relies on a lot of whistleblowers, investigations, and sensitive material. So I'd just be curious to hear any thoughts you have on when you're thinking of solutions other than jetting people out of the country to Canada or wherever. Media is one of them, and exposure is one of them, but it comes with a lot of risks, and it's not always going to work. And very often I think we find ourselves in the fact after the person has gone to jail or their house has been firebombed or whatever, then where the media has the outcry, and by that point they're already so far gone, it's not helpful.
Hello, I'm Emina Nuredinoska from North Macedonia, work for European Center for Not-for-Profit Law. Just want to share the experience from the Western Balkan, just to bring on the table also some other region, maybe not generally how we protect the human rights defender, but generally how the civil society is organized in this region in terms of protecting the civic space. I think that the most important is in all this country is the solidarity of the civil society. So in the most crucial, let's say, and challenging time and period, the civil society are together, not just in one country but all over the region, because almost in all countries we face some autocratic politicians like Vučić in Serbia, Gruevski in Macedonia, Đukanović in Montenegro, and I think that civil society remains strong and protect, let's say, the activists and anti-corruption activists and human rights defenders because of solidarity, but also there is another issue which is the support of the international community. I think we got the strong support during the Gruevski regime from the European Union, US aid, and other, not just financial, this is a side part, but mainly they encourage us to be together. For example, to organize civil society, anti-corruption group, platform, which openly fights at that time regime. And for example, the US ambassador was present in almost all our events and give us this kind of support. And recently, one interesting example is from Serbia. In the frame of USAID-funded project, the civil society organizations who are part of this project, including KISI, an and local civic initiative organization, although it was not in the original plan of the project, we succeed to convince, let's say, the donor to create rapid response facility fund and to support and with this fund to try to support the human rights defenders in Serbia. So something that is globally quite, let's say, widespread. We try to, with the local, let's say, initiative to try and to find a way how to support and mainly journalists, probably investigative journalists who are under attack of the Vučić government. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to invite our panelists to share thoughts, comments, throwback questions to you if that's the case on what we just heard. But we did it was an interesting round with comments around data and around the need for data to really understand the needs and to be able to deliver needs more locally. We also heard about the need to understand and be able to dismantle the drivers that put people in the position of needing to be protected. The issue of visibility and the double-edged sword that perhaps giving visibility to defenders can be, and any thoughts on that, and finally the role of solidarity, including international solidarity in again raising the stakes and giving visibility to this issue. So again, in no particular order, take there's a grab bag here. Take whatever issue you want to or feel better positioned to comment on.
Well, same order, so we'll follow. But when I was listening to you, when you said about the local level needs, about the visibility, I thought of the different angle. I think it's behind the lines. Everyone has it in mind, but I want to raise it as well. And what we see in Lithuania, it's a lot of polarization of society on human rights issues. And it's even harder for human rights defenders, because we see a rise of new controversial CSOs, which say that they fight for human rights, but actually they don't fight So I think I would like to hear as well, is it the same in your countries? And it's really a huge challenge for Lithuanian human rights defenders, because there are other opinions or positions which does not help them in their fight, in their work, what they are doing.
I'm hearing you, Gaia, the thing. And of course in Latin America we have gongos. And of course in Latin America we have CSOs that are created to be part of the government system and to answer in the way the state, well, the government wants to have answers. It's the same thing. When I was speaking about Ecuador and Latin America, I think all of you started thinking about your own countries and your own regions. So what's going on in Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America, I think is exactly the same. Because bad practices are commonly shared by dictators, by presidents who rule under authoritarian and totalitarian regimes. And I don't know why, and talking about shining a light, why it's so hard to us, the civil society, to share more about best practices, protection, and how to face this kind of threats and attacks from, for example, gongos. You work in transparency and anti-corruption in Ecuador, and of course the government has an ally from civil society who works in transparency and anti-corruption and goes out and says that you are wrong, that what the government says is right. And the same happens with human rights. Or usually what happens is that, I know that visibility is key, but we have also faced, I think as many of you, that when you are like being hanged by the government and you claim support from Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch, the government makes a press release saying that George Soros is behind. See? Because they are receiving funds from open society and blah, blah, blah. And the ghosts, it's exactly the same thing. So, as I said before, and I think it's important about keeping that light shining or trying to make it shine better, to exchange good practices, to share good practices, and to do a very good teamwork, not only between countries in Latin America. In our case, we have been working together during the last 5 or 6 years in another way, applying another strategy, but also between regions. So I think it's key to keep sharing good practices in spaces like this. So you don't feel alone, and at least you have like maybe more hope trying to receive help from others rather than international systems. And that's why I mentioned at the very beginning about civil society in general, NGOs, civil society organizations.
Well, I'm understanding more and more that this is a very complex system, and it has many aspects that we have to pay attention to. And the first thing is how important it is not only to support people in risk because they are fighting for something, but to go to the structural causes of what they are fighting for. I mean, that's the first problem, and that's the most important problem, because there are anti-corruption fighters because there is corruption, and there is human rights defender because human rights are violated. So, I mean, that's I think the core issue, and it's related to the conditions of civic space in our countries, and that have to do in different degrees with the conditions and situations that civil society has to act and to perform their activities. The Civicus Monitor has collected information, and in how many countries are human rights and freedom of association and freedom of expression violated? In many countries. There are very few open civic space countries in the world. So that's the, maybe Tara, you want to address that part, because I think that in terms of information, that's very important. And the other aspect is how we can, in the same line, and thank you, Mauricio, for bringing, changing the narrative and shining a light is, I hadn't realized that, but that's the way how we should think. How can we work together to answer to the different levels of problems, from the structural one to the concrete measures to protect defenders in risk? I think we have an enormous work, and it's a lot to be done indeed.
Thank you, Annabelle. I can add, in addition to those who didn't hear our introductions, in addition to moderating sessions, I work for the World Bank, an initiative called the Global Partnership for Social Accountability. We are a civil society-facing grant-making facility. And we're the first to recognize that the World Bank is not particularly known for its use of rights-based approaches. And even the issue of corruption came creeping in very slowly. We probably owe the existence of Transparency International to the fact that Peter Eigen probably got in trouble too many times and was fired by the World Bank, and then went on to pursue his dream in creating Transparency International. That said, so we are in fact constrained by what is perceived as a mandate that must be non-political and must not interfere in our, in our member, shareholder and client countries. But at the same time, we have known to be, and we can be, a key ally in this space, and it often has to do with visibility. It often has to do with the work that we're supporting. Whatever it may be it directly related to environmental issues, or be it directly related to accountability programs, or even indirectly, will often create, will often rub against vested interests, and will often trigger complaints, will trigger whistleblower filings, and so on. And very often, when played right, the fact that that extra visibility of being engaged with and through World Bank supported initiatives, or having something that has the support or the blessing of the World Bank, does grant an additional level of visibility that can translate into protection. And it doesn't always work, and we are the first to take the flak when something nasty happens. But that has only helped increase our standards, and that's something that I see an institution like ours increasingly understanding our role, even consistent with our perceived technocratic and non-political mandate. But it is a bit of a double-edged sword. I can agree with that. Now it's 4:43. We're scheduled to finish at 5. And we may have a gift if we decide that we're done and finish early, but we're not done quite yet, because we set ourselves an ambitious task of moving forward with an agenda. And I'm gonna, before we go through the next round, I'm just gonna put on a provocation. If we blanked out the topic of the session and put anything else as a placeholder, very often the discussion can feel like we're going in circles, and very often there will be requests for, there will be discussions on, splitting hair discussions on definitions. We will find ourselves in discussions about the need for extra data. And finally, and I'm surprised it really hasn't come up yet, the need for more money. what we need is more money for an agenda. And I'm going to say that's absolutely fair, because it's probably true. We need to know what we're talking about, and we need to be able to frame the problem in a compelling and coherent manner, but with a wide enough lens so that it is actionable. We need data for our ability to pitch our issues, but also to understand needs, and the needs are manifold and not properly understood. And it is quite obvious that this, that more money will be needed, but it doesn't grow on a tree unless you have the other things lined up, unless you're able to project that agenda. So with those three, kind of cliche answers to any problem, applied to this one in particular, I would love to hear, for our final round, your thoughts on really what those needs are, and be more granular and specific about data, about resources, about the nature of the problem or definitions, or any other dimension that I may not have addressed. And as you're holding the mic, you can please go ahead and introduce yourself.
I think I managed to turn it on. So first, to introduce myself, my name is Tara Petrovic. I work for the Civicus Monitor. I cover Europe and Central Asia, and we've already heard from you all some very nice words about the Monitor, and thank you, Annabelle, for sort of giving me an entry point to talk about this. But something I also wanted to note is I was particularly inspired by listening to Gaia, because I work for the Civicus Monitor. I cover Europe and Central Asia, but I'm based in Serbia, and I'm a civil society activist from Serbia. And something we've talked about, which has been, it's already been said by Mary Lawler, it's been said by a lot of people, the recognition that, the necessary recognition that anti-corruption activists are human rights defenders, because as we've seen with the different protection mechanisms, being a human rights defender is an important status to have. So we think of it as, and it is in a normative sense, something to desire, something to aspire to. But in our previous panel about foreign agent laws, we talked about how a lot of times and a lot of countries, being a human rights defender or identifying as a human rights activist can be very stigmatizing, and it's not in fact something that will win over public support, so to speak, and that opens you to a lot of smears. So I think it also works both ways, and something I've seen in civil society and in this region in particular is that. So traditional human rights activists or traditional human rights defenders point to their own anti-corruption efforts as something that is a cross-cutting issue that the public will much rather get behind and that can more easily support than traditional human rights topics. So just to add to that conversation, that it works both ways. That traditional human rights activists or NGOs can find help in shifting the narrative about their work by allying themselves with, as you said, anti-corruption activists, grassroots movements, environmental movements, and so on. And the second part, I just wanted to briefly, since Annabelle so graciously offered me the opportunity, there's also been talk about shifting the narrative from the doom and gloom of sort of how bad the world is. And in that sense, I don't have good news. To answer your question, we are now at a point where almost a third, 30% of the human population live in countries with entirely closed civic space, which means that both human rights activists or any other type of dissenter or defender can be killed or imprisoned with complete impunity. When you add together countries with significant countries on civic space, which are closed, repressed, and obstructed countries, 118 out of 198 countries that we cover have that status. So in that sense, one criticism that is very often levied against civil society is that we just criticize, we don't provide concrete solutions. So I as a civil society person, am often will often do that, and will often like to bring up these stats as a reminder of the grim world in which we live. But to end on a positive note, something we also do see is civil society victories, no matter how minor, both in entirely closed civic spaces and in open countries. So no concrete plan, but hope still does exist.
And thank you for that positive note amidst some a reality check that is all but supports the doom and gloom outlook. But thank you. Anyone? And we're taking this into our hands now. Please identify yourself again and share your thoughts.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Zugi Swakota, and I'm a civil society representative from South Africa. My question relates to, or my input or response in a sense, relates to the solidarity aspect, and your question about, blank slate, what would be a priority. I'm not someone who believes that money is everything in terms of support, but in my experience at the moment, I call two countries home. One, autocratic monarchy in Swaziland, and the other South Africa. Very different countries in terms of their democracy or lack thereof. One country where I would not, if I was speaking to my family, say very much of what I really think about, the context, unless I wanted to put them in danger because they live there, and my other half of the family live in South Africa, and I can say anything I like in the media, and I'm, often doing that. So in that context, when, for example, there was the killing of a really important human rights defender, a public, litigant, Tulani Masego, there was massive outcry. There was lots of solidarity. South African organizations who aren't normally doing that kind of work rechanneled their energies, rechanneled their resources to find ways to speak up, to support, to travel into Swaziland where some could. But that died down again. And sustaining that kind of solidarity or allyship is expensive. And very often requires, if you want to sustain it because we must, requires much more than that kind of respond to an emergency, respond to the death of an activist. So I would definitely say resourcing is important. We do have the social capacity or the social capital, and there is that culture of solidarity that still remains, I guess, post 94. But yeah, if I was to emphasize anything, it would be that, particularly in the Southern African region.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for linking both the resourcing and the solidarity arguments.
Thank you. I've really been enjoying this conversation, and it has left me with many questions, of course, but some thoughts to contribute. First, it's a very difficult, complex issue, but all the ones we're challenging or dealing with here this week are. And so trying to go more specific. Why do governments attack human rights defenders? They do it to silence them. So how does that inform us in crafting our response? Well, I'm sorry that our colleague from Canada left, because I wanted to pick up on that example. I think it is important to expand the opportunities for human rights defenders to move abroad when they must. But our other colleague from Colombia talked about how that's not a good solution. So what's wrong with the Canada proposal? I think it's actually quite informative in how they structured it. You heard her say, if they go back to their country, they lose the status. That's terrible. We need to, that's defeat. They're being forced, choose your life or give up your work, or go back to your country and face death. So we need to be telling governments, structure ways for human rights defenders to move such that they can continue their work. And that means supporting them financially, psychosocially, etc., wherever they happen to be. And I'm curious, Lithuania has taken in many such human rights defenders, if you have good practices on that front or challenges. And then a second point, we haven't talked at all, that I've heard, about impunity. Because if we want to protect not just the individual in the crisis moment, but the individuals as a body of people subject to this threat, we have to address the impunity of those who are threatening them. And so here I'm going to go back to your World Bank comment, because yes, the World Bank deserves much, skeptical analysis for some of the things it does. But I want to praise it, because recently Uganda adopted the Anti-Homosexuality Act, and the World Bank did something I think is seismic shift. And by ceasing programming in that country as a result of that incredibly just brutal, systematic attack on an entire subsector of human rights defenders and population, the World Bank set a clear line in the sand, and that has already had effect in other places like Ghana. So we have to look at the attacks on human rights defenders not just as individual attacks, but as systemic attacks. And that was a good response, I think. Another one that we haven't talked about, and this is my last point, is sanctions, which we've just seen employed in Georgia. It didn't succeed, but it's novel. So I'm curious whether the panel has any views on whether that's a good practice we want to try to encourage governments to replicate, or whether it's more problematic than it is helpful.
Thank you. And unless anyone has a final question for the panel, I think it's timely now that we go for our last round. I'm delighted that we have a question on Lithuania and the role that you might be playing or are playing in this in the neighborhood, in a very conflicted neighborhood. The question of impunity, I thank you for the comment on the World Bank, and of course we want to see more on that, and the point on sanctions, but also inviting you to share any final comments on an agenda that is more complex, raises more questions, but is definitely witnessing a window of opportunity for action, and a clear call for action. I'm not going to suggest the order again. You are self-organizing.
Well, you have a very good question. I didn't tackle it, but I think 4 minutes is not enough. But I would say there are a few angles. First of all, Lithuania did a good job inviting those people, but then we have a lot of answers and polarization of society. So I said it about it in different words, and that's really a challenge. Lithuania is quite a small country, even though we have a lot of Ukrainians coming, and we had more than 60,000 3 years ago in that period. So it's really a lot for a country like ours. But the doors were open, and we knew that there is no other situation to. And then there were some challenges with as well people coming from Belarus, from Russia, from Georgia, from other countries as well. So it's really complex, and I think, and I will not answer the whole thing for you, but it has in the society some pluses and some negatives as well. But a lot of human rights defenders are working on this issue, and their work just devoted to these people. What is good that we have a lot of CSOs created by those people coming here, and they can create in Lithuania, and they can work from here. And I think that's very important work they're doing it here. But the polarization of the society as well, I don't have the answer how to fight it, but I think it's a very important question, and we need to tackle it as well.
As we are running out of time, I'm just going to say that when I started my intervention here, I said that we have laws, and we were discussing that with Annabelle, and we must implement them and enforce them. But hearing about this refugee thing, of course we have laws in our countries. Of course, we must work on the implementation and enforcement, but I think that maybe, based on this huge umbrella of defenders and activists, we must start talking about the international law in a new protection system, because it's not the same as in a refugee case, for example. When people try this process for being a refugee, they don't want to go back to their countries anymore, because the conditions in many cases are the ones that they want to get rid of as soon as possible. But when you are an activist, a human rights defender, a transparency promoter, and you receive a threat and you want to move to another country, that's why I mentioned this temporary relocation. You want it to be temporary because you want to go back to your country to fight for your principles and for your values and your cause. So maybe to keep that light shining, we must start thinking in a new international law thing to protect effectively human rights defenders and anti-corruption activists.
Thank you very much, and I think it's very appropriate to ask Annabelle to share the final her final thoughts and the final word for the session. So it really has been a pleasure for me to join you and moderate you as a group and as an audience. But Annabelle, can you finish us off? I think we all go to jail after this.
Thank you, Andres. You did an excellent job. Really, you provoked us and made us go outside our comfort zone. Really, thank you, Gaia and Mauricio, also for your different thoughts. And what and thank you to all those that came at this time of the day and also presented ideas and reflections. I take 3 takeaways. One is yours, Mauricio. I mean, it's we need a different legal. We say figura. How does it in Spanish? Because this is a different situation, and to address this complex system, we cannot address it. And we've seen directly when we have spoken with the government of Uruguay, say, okay, they can be tourists or they can be political refugees, and this is not what we are looking for. This is another arena, much more complex. That's one part. We have to work together on that. The other is money is not the only thing, but resources and funding is crucial. It's very important. And I can suggest this report that came out some days ago, the landscape of public international funding for human rights defenders. And it has a set of recommendations. It's by ProtectDefenders, and how donors can address different aspects of funding human rights defenders activists. And the last one is we need a broader coalition to work together. We need more alliances, more partnerships. And we have to go outside our own organizations to work with social movements and other organizations that so we can really give the solutions that these important issues are requesting. And thank you all, really. I hope we can continue this.